think I can confidently say that this is probably one of the most underrated and most slept on rifles that I've ever tested before. However, as with most things that seem to be too good to be true, there is a catch. It has all the high-end specifications of more well-known brands like Geissele, Daniel Defense, and others. Plus, it's fully ambidextrous, and it has a fluted cold hammer forged barrel. It's not just those high-end features that makes it special, it's the low price point that it comes in with all those high-end specs. But why does it cost less? And that is a question that we are going to try to answer. Now, there is something you should know. I will have a list for everything that we're talking about in today's video. The easiest way to find this list is the first link in the description. It's also pinned in the comments. Let's go into the special features and the specs of the LWRC ICDI556. Now, before we get too far into the weeds on these specs, real quick, I'm just gonna run you front to back and show you what all comes with these, because there might be a few things that I've overlooked. And in case you're wondering about my optic setup, you'll see that. So starting at the front, all of these come with an A2 birdcage flash hider. This one in particular has the spiral fluted barrel. Not all of their barrels are spiral fluted. This particular handguard is their proprietary handguard that's kind of like a modular quad rail, if you will. And it did include the hand stop as well as the heat guards on each side. It also included this piece of pick rail right here. We'll get into the pros and cons of all that here in a minute. Moving back, they do have a mil-spec trigger, but it does have their nickel Teflon type coating that they use. It's their proprietary one that I'm going to go into detail about in a minute. Moving back, you also have an ambidextrous safety, and then you also have an ambidextrous bolt lock and bolt release, as well as magazine release, all that good stuff. Moving back here, it also has an ambidextrous charging handle. And then on the buffer tube, you can see that it is properly staked, albeit it's only properly staked in one spot. Then they have this nice little buttstock right here and a nice little grip here. They also have a nice little battery storage, stuff like that. It's rubberized on the back and the front, and you do have the beaver tail to go against the receiver. Additionally, they also have a more upgraded trigger guard right here than your standard mil-spec rifle. For my optic setup right here, I am using an EOTech. This is the EXPS3 with their, I don't remember the magnifier that I'm using, but it's their magnifier as well. It came as a set. And I got the Unity Tactical Fast Mount for the magnifier, so it just goes straight up and down instead of kicking off to the side. And you got to use the riser in order to have the fast mount be in alignment with it. Now, for all these specs, this is only going to apply to their DI guns. This won't necessarily apply to their piston-driven guns. However, some of them may overlap. Number one, you can get these in 3 calibers: 5.56, 300 Blackout, and 350 Legend. You can get them in a few different colors. You can get them in black, you can get them in gray. They got them in burnt bronze, flat dark earth, and they also have them in some kind of dark red color. A lot of their special colors are usually exclusives to particular retailers like Lipsy's and stuff like that, but nonetheless, they do have them. DI guns, they come in 3 different barrel lengths, and the barrel lengths are kind of wonky. You can either get them as a 10.5 inch, a 12.7 inch, or this one, which is a 16.1 inch, which is kind of an odd length. However, there is a lot going on with this barrel that I need to show you up close because it's kind of crazy. So this is their 16.1 inch spiral fluted cold hammer forged barrel. These spiral flutes accomplish 2 different things. Number one, because of the flutes, reducing the weight of the barrel. Although it reduces the weight, it doesn't compromise the integrity of the barrel. Number two, they increase the surface area to help dissipate heat. This is a cold hammer forged barrel. If you want to know more about cold hammer forging and that process and different types of barrels, I have a video dedicated to that. I will put it up in the left or right hand corner. I don't remember. That way you can watch that video. It is about an hour long, but I go into a lot of stuff about it. But as mentioned, the cool thing about these spiral flutes, they don't compromise the strength, nor do they reintroduce barrel whip. Each barrel is manufactured out of 41V45 steel alloy, treated with LWRC's patented NiCore coating. It's similar to that of like a nitride process, but it's their own type of proprietary coating called NiCore. It's a surface conversion technology that permanently hardens, adds lubricity and more heat and corrosion resistance than even the surface of a hard chrome barrel. So that's what they say on their website. LWRC's website claims that these barrels stand up better to extreme use than standard barrels without degradation of accuracy or loss of velocity because of the way they manufacture these. Nonetheless, I don't know if that's true. I don't have a way to verify that. So we'll just have to take their word for it. Now, because of that barrel technology, because of the flutes that are on it, not only does that help dissipate the heat, as I mentioned earlier, but it also decreases the weight by a substantial amount. For example, this is a 16.1 inch AR15. However, fully naked without the attachments on it, it comes in at 6.6 pounds. That is almost half a pound lighter than my 13.9 inch pin welded AR15 that I have from Daniel Defense. That's quite crazy for a 2-inch barrel difference and still be lighter. Now, one thing I was a little bit worried about when I picked this up was that 16.1 inch. I do typically prefer like a 13.9, 14.5 pin welded type rifle, and it reduces the overall length. But strangely enough, when this gun is collapsed, it's actually shorter. On the top, I have a 13.9 inch pin welded Daniel Defense rifle. And then on the bottom, we have the LWRC 16.1 inch rifle. And we're gonna do a little bit of an overall length test in the collapsed position. For the Daniel Defense, we have an overall length of just right at 32-ish inches right there. And then if we go down to the LWRC, we have the same exact overall length of 32 inches. And that's all thanks to the buttstock right here. Now, the cool thing about this buttstock is, one, it's very small when compared to others. It's very easy to move around. It's a little bit wobbly, which kind of annoys me. I wish it was tighter. However, it does have a decent cheek weld on it for such a tiny stock. So what that means is, not only is this aiding in the light weight of it, but when it's collapsed, it allows it to be much shorter than others. But then if you wanted to, say, put this on a rest and reach out with it, you have a little bit better of a cheek weld, so you can be a little bit more comfortable for longer distance shooting. The other interesting thing you're gonna notice, this gas block uses no set screws. It is literally basically press fit onto here, and then they use a cross pin, hold it in place. The only other company that I know that does cross pinning on their gas blocks is Geisley. Again, that Nicor finish that they talk about they use on their barrels is also on the gas block as well as the gas tube. So now let's get into advanced materials that LWRC does on their guns. LWRC uses a patented nickel alloy coating on all of their bolt carrier groups, barrel extensions, hammers, triggers, to provide better protection from the elements. Now, according to their website, these coatings create a greaseless, permanently lubricious surface that's actually harder than the substrate itself. And this is all according to their website now. Unlike chrome and conventional coatings and applied lubricants, it never rubs off, thins out, or builds up any type of residue. Speaking of the bolt carrier group, you really need to see this thing because it's kind of crazy. Now, the heart and soul of any gun is only as good as its barrel and its bolt carrier group. And this bolt carrier group is very different and unique than almost any other bolt carrier group that I've ever seen before. So number one, they are using nickel boron. Typically with nickel boron, yes, they have a lot more surface lubricity, but as a lot of people have noticed, especially like School of the American Rifle, a lot of times if companies are going to use nickel boron, they need to be spot on with all of their tolerances. If they're not spot on with their tolerances, the nickel boron process can throw all the specs out of whack. Typically, the companies that are using nickel boron don't have good QC. That's essentially it. Now with this one, I don't have all the gauges and stuff that School of American Rifle uses. However, so far, this thing seems to be okay. I do have a bone I gotta pick about this, as you'll see later in the video. They said they redesigned the extractor, the springs, the bolt face, and the locking lugs, and it's manufactured using a high technology alloy usually reserved for the manufacture of Formula One racing transmission components. So essentially they're saying the type of metal they use to manufacture their bolts is typically used in Formula One transmissions. The biggest thing I noticed is you're gonna notice this gas key is integrated into the bolt carrier group. There's no staking done. This is fully integrated, and that can be a common failure point in a lot of bolt carrier groups, and they simply eliminated it with this guy. LWRC did say this on their website. They said during their testing, they were able to run over 10,000 rounds without any stoppages or failures, and was neither clean nor lubricated during the testing process. That's impressive if they were actually, if they were able to get that. Thing I'm curious about is, how many times did they get it to go 10,000 rounds without stoppage or cleaning or lubrication? Was that only one bolt carrier group? Or did they test like 50 and only the one passed? Sometimes marketing geniuses and stuff know how to say a lot without saying a lot, if that makes sense. I'm not saying they're lying. I'm just saying, I don't know. When you move on to this upper receiver and this handguard, you're gonna know something very interesting about it that's kind of hard to show you without going up close again. So let's get into this upper receiver and handguard real quick because it is very unique. First thing you'll notice is the upper receiver extends all the way out to here. And this is the handguard, and it attaches directly to the upper receiver. You know, on most handguards, when they install the handguard is locked against the barrel nut, which technically means the handguard, although it's free floated, is technically touching the barrel and isn't completely free floated. But with this one, you'll notice that because of this interesting little shell looking thing that goes around the barrel, that it is completely free floated. And then when the handguard interfaces, you have 10 holes for 10 different Torx nuts that fit all the way around. In technical terms, they call this a monoforged upper receiver, and that's what it means. It just means that it extends out a little bit beyond this point. The other interesting thing is you'll notice this is a continuous Picatinny rail. Not very many companies offer this. Now this is gonna bring me to my next point about handguards. When I first got this, I thought there wasn't any sling swivel slots on the handguard, and there isn't. There's no sling swivel slots on this handguard. And I was a little bit bummed because the only sling swivel spot I could find was right here. However, it's right here on the back of this hand stop. Kind of fascinating. I honestly went like 2 months without realizing that was there. Now, I'm typically not the biggest fan of using these little types of bolts right here on the handguard, but these are very rugged Torx bolts, and they seem to have a high torque rating. I don't know exactly what the torque rating is, but it was pretty good when I took them out. But that's what's gonna help you prevent slippage and twisting on your handguard. And because they've moved the junction between the handguard and the upper from here to here, you're able to get more optic mounts without having to bridge the gap between your upper and lower. So as of right now, LWRC offers 2 different handguard options. They either have an M-LOK or they have this one, which is their proprietary one. On their M-LOK version, they do have an integrated sling swivel for slings and stuff like that. However, I never recommend using an actual sling swivel on those unless they're reinforced, but nonetheless, it's there. They also have different length handguards that you can get. Well, as you notice, like this one doesn't cover the complete length of here, but you have to buy those separately. Typically, you usually get this shortened handguard. Now, this is their proprietary handguard, and I like it and I don't like it. So this is kind of how the proprietary handguard right here works. These look almost like they could be M-LOK compatible, these little slots here, but they're not. Essentially, like here's a part that comes with it. They just got all these little screw holes. This guy right here, you just simply align it up, and then you'd take the little screws that come with it and put them on. The biggest downside to this is these screws can be very easy to lose. Now, obviously, as you can see, this thing not only has all of the same high-end specifications as some of its competitors, like Daniel Defense and Geisley, but then they take it a step beyond and do things like the keyless bolt carrier group, the fluted barrels, and then this crazy mono-forged upper receiver type deal with a continuous pick section. The craziest part about all those high-end specs about it is these come in for an average price of about $1,500. I've seen them as high as about $1,900, but they can be found for as little as $1,200 to $1,300. I'll have more info at list so you can check that out. But for $1,500 on an average price, there's no other fully ambi guns from any other high-end companies that you can get for that price. And this thing is simply decimating them on pricing and specs alone. But as I mentioned earlier in the video, there is a catch, and here's what it is. Their barrel and their gas block that I showed you earlier are not user serviceable. What does that mean? Basically, they don't want you taking that gas block off, and they don't want you taking this barrel off and swapping it out for something else. Now, it is possible to remove this barrel. Focus Trip made a very good video on this where he did a barrel swap on here, but it's not for the faint of heart. Here's why. Number one, you need to go purchase a proprietary barrel nut tool. That barrel nut tool costs $125. In addition to that, even when you get the barrel nut tool, their barrel nut is torqued much higher than other barrel nuts from a standard AR-15. In addition to that, many people have reported that when they went to take that off, they had to use a torch because it had red Loctite on it. The other part that kind of is odd about this is you could actually buy an LWRC barrel and you could fit it to any other type of barrel. However, not every barrel will fit this LWRC upper. There are a few that will, but they don't fit easily without modification. Here's what I mean. So the reason why, one has to do with this upper receiver extension right here. So as I mentioned, there is a proprietary tool that you have to pick up that slides all the way into here so it can reach the barrel nut, which is located way back here, which is not a big deal. But then, like I said, you got to heat it up with a torch and all that other crazy stuff to get it off. Now let's pretend you were able to get this barrel off and you wanted to put, say, this barrel on. You're still going to run into another problem. On all these barrels, you're gonna have this little indexing pin right here. And that indexing pin will fit, I'll throw a photo up because I don't have an upper receiver to show you, but that indexing pin fits right into a slot in the upper receiver, and the height of this pin sits below the threads of the upper so that the barrel nut can thread on. Now I'm gonna show you a photo of the LWRC indexing pin. Notice that not only is that pin much shorter than a standard indexing pin, but it's also rounded over on the top. What that means is if you were gonna fit a different brand barrel onto an LWRC, you would need to file down this indexing pin, and you need to do it the right amount. Because if you don't, it's gonna sit too high above the threads and your barrel nut simply won't thread on. Additionally, with barrels, they gotta be the correct profile back here. If you look right here, you can see the profile of this barrel and how it flares out as it gets towards the upper. The inner diameter of that tool that they use is also proprietary to their profile. Essentially, you could buy another barrel, you could get the indexing pin filed down correctly, but if this part isn't the right profile, you won't be able to get the tool on to lock the barrel nut on. Kind of crazy, right? With that being said though, there have been people that have done it. I know Focus Trip has done a barrel swap on his, as I mentioned earlier. The best way to figure out what barrels fit, if this is something you want to undertake yourself, is to go to the LWRC subreddit where people talk about those things. So that brings up the question of, all right, cool, I can't do the user servicing on my gas block or my barrel. What happens if I outshoot this barrel? Well, number one, it is a cold hammer forged barrel. You would literally need to do just a lot of shooting, or 20 to 25,000 rounds through this gun of regular shooting before you're gonna shoot the barrel out. That's on average. That's not set in stone numbers. With that said, if you ever did have to get the barrel replaced, you simply send your upper to LWRC. They install a new barrel and ship it right back to you. There is another con due to this barrel. As I mentioned earlier, these come in multiple different colors. But if you happen to get one in a color you don't like and you wanted to Cerakote it, well, the downside is that barrel has to be removed in order to Cerakote it. And unless you have the right tools and the right know-how to remove that barrel, and or the Cerakoter has all those tools and know how to remove that barrel, you're not gonna be able to get this upper Cerakoted. So it might be best, if you're looking at these, to get the color you want the first time, because it would actually be cheaper to spend the extra money on the different colors than it would be to even buy the barrel nut, take it off yourself, and have it Cerakoted. Now, although it has that big con, now let's talk about what this thing is like to shoot. Now, something you're gonna have to understand here, I do get a lot of shooting footage for this. However, a lot of it was lost because my SD card got corrupted, so you have to take my word on some things. I don't usually do that in videos, but this one time I lost a bunch of footage. The first time I went to go shoot this, the first thing that I noticed on here was how long this safety is on the right side. It is an ambi safety. But the difference between this ambi safety and other ambi safeties I've used is both sides are the exact same length. And what that means is when you're in the shooting position and you go to disable that safety to pull the trigger, it hits your hand. In fact, it's so long and so cumbersome, I ended up taking that side off just to continue the test and the evaluation. It was that cumbersome. Not something that I like, and I looked on their website and they don't seem to offer a shorter version of that. If you wanted fully ambi and you still wanted to be able to, come up and depress the safety and pull the trigger real quick, which I can't do, you'd have to put a different type of safety in there. However, during my testing, I think I got a little over 600-ish rounds through the gun right now. I tested it with various types of magazines like Magpul P mags, I tested it with some ETS mags, and I tested it with some Lancer mags and stuff like that. Tested it with a few different types of 55 grain, 62 grain, stuff like that. And everything ran perfectly up until I got to 150 round mark. At the 150 round mark, I got a failure to lock open on the last round. And at first I kind of just was like, well, probably just some weak. So I continued shooting for the rest of the day until I got to about 209 rounds. Had a couple more failures to lock open. So once I got back from the range, I decided to inspect the bolt carrier group, and this is what I found. So what you're seeing here is failing gas rings on an AR-15. So if you ever want to test this yourself on your own bolt carrier group, you simply just pull the end of the bolt out of the carrier, stand it on its own, and it should hold its own weight without collapsing. If it collapses, that means you got bad gas rings and you need to replace them. And that really bothered me because I'm like, wow, I barely got 200 rounds through this and the gas rings are already failing. I don't know if the gas rings were bad when I pulled it out of the box because I didn't test them, but no gas ring should ever go down that fast. And that's a little bit concerning and a little bit disappointing, especially because I just told you about all the stuff that LWRC does for their manufacturing and for their QC. You would think something like that wouldn't slip through, but it did. I also noticed a slight little nick on the lug of the bolt. I don't know if that's anything to be worried about, but sometimes when there's a nick there, that could be caused with the lugs not being perfectly aligned with the chamber and the lugs hitting the edge of the chamber. It didn't get worse, but it is something I noted. After the gas rings failed, I just ordered a new set of gas rings. They're like $2, something like that. Replaced them, went back to the range. Everything ran perfectly for the next 400 or so rounds, never had any other issues. Couple things I noted about how this gun feels to shoot. Number one, despite having a 16.1-inch barrel, it's not front heavy. So when you're coming up from low ready, or if you're in this position and coming out, it's insanely light and easy to pop up with. The other thing I noticed is despite only having an A2 flash hider on here, this gun shoots very flat. Now, honestly, with other guns that have A2 flash hiders, it's not the flash hider that makes the gun not shoot that flat. It is the fact that the guns aren't gassed properly. It's easy to shoot it nice and flat without a lot of recoil. Now, the other thing that I noticed about it was despite having a mil-spec plus trigger, although the trigger's smooth, it's still pretty heavy compared to others. It's actually really easy to shoot it pretty quickly while being accurate. That's actually quite impressive considering that it's a heavy trigger. I did find that the ambi system is nice and easy to use. I like it a lot. If you want to know more about ambi systems, I suggest you go watch this video right here because I'm not going to get into all the weeds in today's video, but I have a little section in this video where I compare doing reloads with different types of fully ambi rifles. Now, when it came to accuracy, this gun does not claim to be sub MOA, therefore I didn't even attempt to test sub MOA, and this is the footage that I lost, so I'm sorry, you just have to take my word for it. Where I go, where we have some targets set up at different distances. They're about 2-foot squares. One of them's at like 287 yards, one of them's at like 340 yards, something like that. There's another one at a different distance. And if I go to the right place, I can shoot 950 yards. Because I wasn't doing long range, I decided to just shoot the shorter ones. And shooting rested on the bed of my truck like this, I was hitting steel with no problems using a magnified red dot sight. So it was just as accurate as I could be. So let's go over the pros and cons real quick because there's some things about this you're gonna really wanna know. Now, I will be honest about these cons. It's gonna be a little bit difficult to be too hard on this gun because of how much it offers for the price point. But here's some things that I've noticed about it that I don't like. Number one, I don't like this proprietary handguard. Earlier I was talking about there's two types of handguards. I didn't realize that this one wasn't M-LOK. When I asked the company to send it out, I just said, hey, this one looks cool. It comes with a hand stop and some, rail scale type looking things. That one would be fun, but honestly, there's nothing that will fit on this rail unless you have LWRC's proprietary attachments. Like right here, we got some pick rail, but not any pick rail will fit on here. You have to get it from LWRC. And essentially what it is a modular version of a quad rail. If you bought a bunch of these pick rails and just attached them all around it, you could make this into a fully fledged quad rail. So part of me wishes that I would have got the M-LOK, but we're gonna talk more about that one in a second because not all is what it seems with the M-LOK either. Now, there is a couple of things that bother me about their handguard. When I took this off to show it to you up close, there was no thread locker on any of these bolts that are around here. Something I just noticed, they were very easy to take off. I did use some blue Loctite to put them back on. Obviously, I mentioned this earlier, I hate that the ambi safety is the same length on both sides. I wish they made one side shorter so you didn't have to fully remove it to use it effectively. On the charging handle, it's been a great charging handle. I have nothing against it. It's just a little bit of an outdated design, especially for the year 2024. Aside from that, there's not really any other cons. Now, what are the pros? 90% of everything that LWRC manufactures is done in-house. Only like small little non-critical components are outsourced, so that's always a good thing. And because of that, they are able to ramp up the QC. However, as you saw, my bolt carrier group seemed to slip through. Who knows? I love the fact that despite being 16.1 inches, it's smaller and it's lighter weight than most of my other rifles. I like that they use a keyless bolt carrier group because that's just one less thing to fail. The fasteners that are used for the gas key, companies that use the wrong ones don't torque them enough or don't stake them properly. And that's just one less thing that we have to think about with this bolt carrier group. Now, with this particular model, with this handguard, these tend to be the most affordable. If you do get this, it does come with the handguard and all the panels and a little pick rail for you to get going. So it comes just like this out of the box, minus the optics. Now, the other thing I like about it is it's fully ambi. You can lock it open with one hand. You can send the bolt home with the same hand. It makes doing reloads and clearing malfunctions a lot easier and seamless. And lastly, it's the price. As I've mentioned earlier, this thing is just quite affordable. However, that brings me to my next question. Would I buy it knowing what I know now? If I was in the market for kind of a dual-purpose rifle that isn't really designed for super long range, something that's mid-range, something that can kind of just do everything, I would buy this. I feel like the pros outweigh the cons, and I feel like with all those specs and with the pricing, it makes it almost a superior rifle to the other more expensive counterparts that we mentioned earlier. However, that all depends if you're willing to send your gun off to get the barrel replaced when it needs to be done, or become a master gunsmith to replace it yourself. But if you are considering picking something up like this, there are some things that you should consider, because if you don't know these things, it can end up costing a lot more in the long run. Here's what I mean. As I mentioned earlier, you won't be able to Cerakote this upper, mainly because you won't be able to take the barrel off. It would just be very difficult. That's all I'm gonna say. I'm not gonna say it's impossible, but it might cost quite a bit more. Now, they do have multiple colors. I think if you wanted a specific color that they offer, it would be cheaper to actually just go get that color, pay the extra money, than it would be to order the $125 tool to get the barrel off and do all that stuff. So that's something to consider. Get the color you want the first time. Secondly, none of the DI guns that I saw come with a full-length rail. However, they do sell additional handguards separately, and they do have some that are full length. And those rails typically range between $265, $330, something like that. The reason I bring this up is, as I mentioned earlier, the version with their proprietary handguard is the one that goes on sale the most. But let's just pretend you wanted M-LOK. Well, the M-LOKs, the ones I keep seeing, are like $1,700, $1,800. So if you could get this for $1,300 on sale, then go spend about $300 on a handguard, you would come out a little bit cheaper and have M-LOK. The downside to the M-LOK version, it does not include a hand stop or any of these covers. None of these piece attachments, like the handguards and all the shields and stuff, will fit onto M-LOK. So you won't be able to transfer these over. You have to just use M-LOK parts. So it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. I am personally gonna get a longer rail just to see what it looks like. So I say that to say this. You'll have to play around with pricing. I'll have it all listed over at the list if you wanna check that out. Let me know if you have any questions about this, or if there's anything that I missed in the video. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. But until next time, guys, I love you, and you guys stay sexy.